Welcome everyone to our fall leaf painting tutorial. I'm really excited about this one because fall leaves. I love everything about fall, and living here in Southwest Florida, we don't get this. So I really can enjoy it by painting them. So I thought this time I would do something a little bit simpler, not so much a composition, but just, where we have leaves on our paper and we can paint them. So what I did was I'm painting on, this is just my reference photo, I'm painting on a 9 by 12 watercolor block, but a block basically means it's sealed on all sides, and then when I'm finished my painting I can go in and put a little butter knife in there and just remove the paper from the block. So normally though, if I just have a single sheet of watercolor paper, I tape it down to my board. I would just, tape the edges down and then go from there. But on a block, you don't have to do that. So what I did was I made my pencil lines much darker this time, so it's easier to see where I'm painting and all that. Normally, I would never draw my pencil lines this dark, only because once they are wet, you can't erase them. Once you've added water to these pencil lines, they're not going to erase. And also, this is just way too dark for me when I normally do a drawing for my painting. So normally I will use an HB pencil, and you can get these at any craft store or online, and they have different numbers. This is just the HB. They have number 2, they have 4, 6, 8. The higher the number, the darker the lead. And this HB is very light, and this is what I always use to draw out my reference photo, but it's very light. So I'm just saying, but today I just used a regular number 2 pencil, which is really dark, but I did that for you guys so you can kind of see my pencil lines. Now, another trick is if you're using number 2 or a darker lead pencil, and you want some of your lines are really dark and you want to be able to lift them just a little bit before you wet your paper, you can take you get a kneadable eraser. This thing I've had since I started watercolors, and it's like silly putty in a way. And you can go and do this. If you want to lift out a little bit, if some of it's too dark and you ever want to just lift out some color without erasing the lines completely, you can just go in and tap, and it'll just lift out some of the lines a little bit more. It doesn't leave eraser dust like this would. Don't use this to erase. It's going to discolor your paper, and you're going to leave dust. So get one of these kneadable erasers if you can. They're really, really nice. So what I did was, here's a little trick. I don't know if I showed you guys this. If you ever have a reference photo and you want to trace it to your paper, what I did was I just took my number 2 pencil and I just scratched in over top of my leaves. And then I turned this back over, lined it up to my paper, and then I just went in with my pencil and just traced the outline of my leaves. And what it did was, it didn't leave this darker of a line. It left a very faint line, but I went back over it with my number 2 so you guys could see it. So that's a trick you can do if you ever need to trace something to your paper. Okay, let me get this stuff out of the way. So I have my little palette here with some colors on it, and I thought would be pretty for my leaves. So I have some Vermillion, and I'm going to have a list of colors that I'm using. I will put that in the description as well with the tutorial. So I have Vermillion, which is like an orangey color. I have Scarlett Lake, which is a red. I have Alizarin Crimson, which is a darker red. I have some magenta here. I have some Indigo. I have some Sap Green, Paynes Gray, and yellow Ochre, and raw Sienna. So if you don't have these exact colors, don't stress about it. It's not a big deal. I might not even use all these colors. Just as long as you have a red, a blue, and a yellow, you can make all these other colors. So if you have red and a yellow, you can make an orange. If you have red and blue, you can make more of a darker purpley color if you wanted to. If you have a red and a green, you can mix them to get browns. So don't stress them. As long as you have the three primaries, a blue, a yellow, and a red, you'll be good. I just, have these extra ones. I thought I could use those if I wanted to, but it's not really needed. Okay, so I'm going to start with my number, what am I going to start with? My number 8 round brush. And I have my water here, my towels. And always, always, you want to spritz your paints with water before you begin. That way, you're all ready to go when you're ready to paint. Okay. One little tip. Oh, before I give you that. I did not draw in my lines, my veins, because I'm going to show you a cool technique that you can do if you want to put vein lines in. You don't have to on your leaves. This is not, I don't want you to feel like you have to copy how this reference photo is, where the exact color is, exactly where it's placed on the leaves. Please don't worry about that. I'm going to just drop in some color on my wet paper, and I'm going to let those colors blend and play together and create some beautiful colors. I am just using this as a guide. I am not trying to copy this exactly. Okay, so just don't stress about it if your leaf doesn't look exactly like the one in the reference photo. Okay, so back to the veins. I'm going to show you a cool trick that you can do to get these veins. Now you'll notice, like on this leaf, these veins are lighter. And on this one, they're a little bit darker. So there's a few different ways that you can achieve this vein look if you want to put them in. But that's towards the end. So I'm going to show you that. So here's a little tip. People sometimes have a hard time, and I've noticed this too when I teach. At the end of on Thursdays and Fridays, I teach watercolors. So they have the water balance, water to paint ratio, they really, really struggle with sometimes. And here's a little tip. If you're painting on dry paper, you want your paints to be really watery. If you're painting on wet paper first, if you wet your paper first, and then you want your paints to be a little creamier. So dry paper, watery paints. Wet paper, creamier, not as watered down paints. Just a little tip for you. But I am going to wet my leaves first. I'm going to use my number 8, and I'm going to just tap excess little drips off, and I'm going to go in. Now remember, you're going to end up seeing these pencil lines when I'm finished painting. You're just going to see them because they're really dark. And that's okay, because what I can do, if I wanted, when I'm finished my painting, I could go back over it with a black micron pen, or even a fine Sharpie marker, and do a ink, and which really makes a neat looking painting as well. You ever see those watercolors with ink? That's how they do it. So I could do that if I wanted, if I didn't like the way these pencil lines look. So just remember, when you're drawing in your reference photo, don't press down too hard. You don't want your lines to be this dark, because you're definitely going to see them after you've done your painting. So I'm just wetting my whole leaf here. And you see, I'm not just using one brush load of water. I'm going back a few times and just getting a nice even layer of water. Nice, you just want a nice sheen so you can even like tilt it and see in the light if you've got it all covered. And give it a minute, not a minute, but just give it a few seconds to kind of absorb into the paper, especially if you're using 100% cotton paper. You give it a second or two to kind of absorb down. Okay. So this leaf has some greens and it looks like some yellows and some reds. So remember, we always start in watercolors with our lightest color, our lightest paint color. And that's going to be my yellow. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my yellow ochre here, and I'm going to get it a little bit creamier, not as watery, because my paper's already wet. So I'm just getting a little bit creamier paint, not very watered down. And I'm just going to drop in random little areas of yellow. And remember, I'm not trying to copy this exactly. I'm just putting in little areas of that color here and there, and can kind of see how it just kind of feathers out because my paper is wet. Okay, I'm going to rinse my brush, tap the excess water off, and now I don't want these dots on here, so I'm just going to go in with a clean brush, damp brush, and I'm just going to help that paint. I'm just going to help it, move it around a little bit. And rinse and blot, and then I just kind of go in here and just kind of push it around a little bit. Get it moving. If I get outside my lines, I'm not worried about it. Okay, so just a very soft, areas of yellow. If I wanted to make a green, I could mix my blues and my yellows. So it's, totally up to you what you want to do. All right, so next I'm going to go in my sap green here. If you don't like a green that you have, you can use a blue or a yellow, mix them together. It's a little bit creamier paint. It's not very runny on my palette. A little bit of water in there. And then I'm going to just take some of my green and drop it in. My paper's still damp. And just kind of drop it in. Same thing like I did with the yellow. Just want to make some pretty colors in my leaves. I use the tip of my brush. And I also will use like the belly. I'll push down and use the belly of my brush just to get some of that color in. Okay, I'm going to rinse, blot, and then same thing. I'm using a damp brush and I'm just kind of pushing down. I'm not painting like painterly like this. I'm just kind of taking that paint and I just kind of push it where I want it to go. And sometimes I'm just plopping right down on it. Just to get in my base layers of color. Because I'm going to go back in once this has dried a bit, and I'm going to go back in with some darker value paint. Darker color. This is just like the first layer. All right, now I'm going to grab a little bit of red. And I'm going to use my Scarlett Lake. If you don't have Scarlett Lake, use whatever red you have. Same thing, not very wet paint because I'm putting it on wet paper. So I'm going to kind of focus down here with a little bit of my red. Now when I work in smaller areas, I tend to hold my brush further down to the bristles. When I'm trying to be a little looser, I hold my brush back further in my hand. Now this paper that I'm using, it's very good paper. It's my Arches brand. And this actually, normally I use 140 pound weight. This one is actually a 300 pound, which is a very stiff, thick paper. So really can hold water for a very long time. If yours is not feathering out like this, let me pull this up a little bit. See how the ends of that red is like feathering out? That's because my paper is still damp. If yours is not doing that, then take your clean brush, get some water on it, and go back over and add a little bit of water, or you can spritz it with your spritzer bottle. So now I'm just taking a little bit of that that red I put down, and I just rinsed my brush, and I'm going back over the red just like I did with those other colors, and just kind of help move them around a little bit. You just want this to look very organic and not forced. And don't labor over one area for too long. And you honestly do not want to worry about details right away. Details come last. Take a little bit more red. You just want to get some of that base color down here and there, and don't stress about copying the reference photo or even what I'm doing exactly. I'm just trying to make a pretty leaf, so I love the red in it. I'm going to rinse. And now I'm going to go back and pick up some of my yellow again. The little pile that I had mixed up here, just going back in there. And I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow, and I'm going to drop it in here and there. Get some more color in there, and also help kind of push that red. If your paper feels too dry, stop and re-wet it. I'm going to get some of my green now. And I'm not painting strokes. I'm just tapping with the tip and with the belly of my brush, and I'm just tapping in my color. Now, we know red and green are complementary colors, which means they are opposite on the color wheel, and when mixed together, they form like a brown, which will work really fine for what we're doing today. But normally, you don't really want to mix red and brown on your paper where you're going to like really mix them together, unless you need a brown. So I just picked up a little bit more green, wet my brush a little bit with the green paint, and I'm just going in, and I'm just adding in more color. Now, if yours is looking a little dotty, then just go ahead and just kind of use broader strokes to kind of smooth, you know, smooth things out. Get a little bit more red. I'm going to bring some of that red out. And see, I'm kind of angling, so I'm using, like, you know, not just the tip of my brush. I kind of use the side as well. Got a bunch of red on my brush that time. And I'm just kind of pressing it. My paper's still pretty damp. And adding some more reds. And now I'm going to grab some of that yellow. So basically just used my yellows, my green, and my red. Okay, I'm going to take a clean, damp brush and just kind of clean up to a nice little point. There. Just kind of clean up. Use some water to move that paint around. And remember, you can stop this recording at any time if you want to, you know, or if you just want to watch it first and then paint, or paint along, up to you. I'm just kind of filling in these little pointed areas a little bit with what I have on my paper already. Okay, I kind of like that. That's pretty. So what I'm going to do is, now I'm going to show you. My paper is still very wet. Okay, but I'm going to show you a trick. Okay. So I have an old gift card here from Michael's. And actually, I want to cut this. Let me get some scissors. Scissors were over here. Okay. So if your paper is wet, what I can do is take this card and cut it. Okay. I could take this on my wet paper, and I can go in and scrape in my vein lines if I wanted to. And what's going to happen is, on this very wet paper, the dents, that this will make a dent, so they are not removable once you do it. That color will kind of fill into the well, so it will make the veins darker. Now, if I wanted my veins lighter, I could wait for this to dry a little bit until it's just damp. And then I can go in and scrape in my veins, and it will just remove the paint and will make my veins lighter. So wet paper, and if you do it with wet paper, it'll make them darker. If you wait for it to dry a little bit and then you go over it, it will make them lighter. You could also, if you wanted, paint them in. I mean, you know, certainly can paint them in with a fine, small round brush. Once that has dried, you could go back on dry paper and paint in your veins, or you don't even have to add veins. I mean, it's totally up to you. It is totally up to you. This is your painting. So I think I'm going to wait for that to dry a little bit, and then I'll go in and show you what it looks like when it's dried a little bit, what the veins look like. So a stem. I'm just going to take a little bit. Here's what I'm going to do. If you don't have a burnt sienna, I'm going to take a little bit of my red and a little bit of my green. I'll make my own burnt sienna. or actually my own brown. You want a warmer brown, more red. You want more of an ashy brown, more green. And as you can see, I'm not adding any more water. So that's a nice brown. And I'm going to do this on dry paper. I'm just going to kind of go, I'm going to add a little bit of brown. Very red. See where I'm holding my brush? I'm not even switching brushes, but if you want to, you can use a smaller round brush. So I'm just putting in a little bit of that brown. Now I don't want my whole stem to be that one value brown. So I'm just going to go in now and get a little green on the tip of my brush. And I'm going to kind of go over the rest of that stem with my green. A little bit of water, too dry. Maybe put a little green right at the top. But just kind of, so you have a little bit of variety of color in my stem. I don't want it to just be all brown. Okay. Yeah, it's still pretty wet. So I'm going to just wait a minute or any chit chat before I get started over here. I'm going to wait another few seconds. Let that dry a bit. And go wait until your paper is dry. When you feel it, it's room temp, it's dry. If it still feels cool, lightly cool, it's still damp. Oh, I think I have my dryer plugged in. Let me dry it just for a second. I don't want it all the way dry though. Okay, that's good. Just a little damp. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of scrape down my paper. And you can see the vein where I've scraped in. It's not really dark. So let me go ahead and do one over here. And then I'll just add a few. Let me turn this. Sorry. I'll just add a few. Now remember, once you do this, your these dents remain, so you can't, like lift them out. I don't know if you can even see that. They're so light. See that? Just by using a card. Sorry for the blurriness. So that's a good way to get lighter veins, by just waiting for your paper to dry a little bit and then going over it with the edge of a card. And then on this one, I'll show you when to do, how to get it darker. So just random with your veins. Don't have to copy. Exactly. Just put a few in there. And I'm going to wait for this, for all my leaves to be finished. And then I'm going to go in and add some nice little rich darks here and there. Okay. So let's move on over. Let's move over this guy. Same thing. I'm going to wet my paper first. So I'm just going to go in. I have no veins or anything drawn in here. Just taking my number 8 round. This is my most versatile brush. I use this one a lot. Number 8. And don't forget, if you like, you know, when you do a painting, now these are here for you to just watch and paint, and you, as much as you want. You don't have to do every month painting. I mean, that's totally up to you. But I would love, you know, if you do one, if you want to post it in the Facebook group so I can see. Okay, nice and evenly wet. And I'm going to do the same thing. But this time I'm going to use, I think, some of my Alizarin Crimson red. Stick them with my yellow ochre here. A little bit creamier paint because my paper's wet. And I'm just going to go in and do the same thing. This time I'm being a little bit more, you know, I'm going to push down a little bit more with my yellow. Here and there. So I'm not even looking at my reference because I wanted to make it my own. And I'm just a damp brush now. I rinsed my brush, damp brush, and I'm just going to kind of fill in this leaf with just water. That's all I'm using right now. I paint a lot with just water. Just kind of filling it in. Do a little bit more of my yellow. This one has a lot of yellow undertones to it. Okay. Totally filled that one in. Rinsing my brush, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of my Alizarin Crimson here, which is a little bit of a darker, richer red than that Scarlett Lake. If you don't have this, that's fine. You can always take, if you have a brighter red, you can always take that red and then go in with a tiny, tiny bit of green and dull it down. You could always take your red and add a little bit of blue to kind of make it more of a warmer purpley color. Totally up to you. And I haven't even used my orange. Could do that. I could do that one in this one, or maybe in here. We'll see. Or maybe I'll add a little bit over here later on. But right now, this is all wet. I have lots of Alizarin Crimson on my brush, and I'm going to go in, and if you have Alizarin Crimson, you'll know that one really explodes when it gets on wet paper. See how it does that? I'm just being very random here and letting that color just go. Let it do its thing. All right, I'm going to rinse. And I think I will grab a little bit of my orange as well. My Vermillion, creamy Vermillion, and I'm going to drop in a little bit of that. And make a really pretty fall leaf here. So look out at that. Was like a spotted cheetah. I'm going to take my wet brush. I just dipped it in my water. And I'm now going to just push all those colors around so I don't have spots. But I'm not trying to fill it in. I'm just very, you know, little wisps here and there, moving that color around. Every now and then I do rinse my brush to get clean water, just to help me push that paint around. If you notice you're getting puddles on your paper, then just take a tissue or something and blot it. All right, I'm going to dab in a little bit of my tiny bit of green, my sap green. So I'm just going to grab my sap green a little bit. Kind of creamy, not very watery. I'll put a little bit here. Maybe on the tip. Just here and there. Get a little interest. Okay. Let that just blend. And why not? Let me just take a little bit of my indigo here, my blue. I got a tiny, tiny bit on the tip of my brush. And I'm going to just go at the very tip here. Right on some of these edges. Just to put a little bit of darker color while my paper is wet. Just here and there. And you see I'm not scrubbing it together. I'm just dropping it in. And my paper is wet, so it's just going to kind of feather out. It's not going to really sit there. Clean brush. I'm lightly just going to kind of pull it out a little bit. Just a little bit. Okay. I have a little bit more of my red here. A little bit here. So you have lots of time. If your as long as your paper remains wet, you have time to fool around with it and adjust your colors however you'd like. I'm going to take a little bit of my orange. And then rinse, and I just, every now and then, I like to go over it with my damp brush. Okay, so I'm going to leave that. Now, while this is very wet, I'll go back in now with my card, and it should, I'm going to create my veins, and it should make the veins darker because my paper is wet now. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to scrape down my veins. And because my paper is wet, what's going to happen is that paint is going to go into that vein. I mean, I can always help it later. If I want to add more color to them, I can. Now, I'm not pressing too hard here. Okay, you see how they look a little bit darker than the first leaf? That's because I did it on my wet paper, and the paint kind of filled in those little wells, kind of filled in. So drier paper, you're going to pull the paint out. Wet paper, you're going to get those darker veins. All right, let's do that stem. And I'm just going to, let's see, I'll go in with, let me use my burnt sienna. If you don't have that, that's fine. You can use a brown, you know, your red and green. It's not much difference there. I could add a little red to that and make kind of like the same color. So a little bit of my burnt sienna, dry paper, and same thing. I'm going to just pull it down a little bit, and then I think I'm just going to rinse my brush here, blot it really good, get the excess water off, and just use what paint I have on my stem and pull that down. Maybe I can drop in a little bit of green right here. All right, so we're going to move to this one. This is pretty much dry. I'll wait for that one to dry, and I'm going to go back and kind of tweak these a little bit. So same thing here. I'm going to wet all my leaves. Now, you notice like this leaf here is overlapping this one a little bit, and these two are just basically touching. Normally, I like to have things kind of overlap one way or the other and not just touch like that. That's like called a tangent, and that's just kind of like a no-no, as well as this one. But this is just, you know, we're not doing like a total, you know, true composition here. We're just doing some leaves. So I'm just going to wet my leaves. I'll do like 2 at a time. I don't want my leaves to dry out as I go around. So I'm just going to do these 2, get them nice and evenly wet. Okay, this one I'll do that. I'm going to do a little bit of my vermilion, my orangey. Remember, wet paper, creamier paint. Easier, it's only because it's easier to control that way. If you did a very watery paint with this very wet paper, it's harder to control. All right, so I just dropped in a bunch of orange, just like that. Rinse, and I'm going to grab a little bit of my Alizarin Crimson red, and I'm going to drop that right over top. Or no, but I'm not going to fill in that entire leaf. I'm not going to now like fill it in. And now I'm going to grab a little bit of my yellow ochre, and I'm going to drop that in, let it blend and mix right on the paper. Now you'll notice because this leaf is wet, it might bleed out a little over to that leaf. Totally fine. So I just dropped in my yellow, my red, and my orange into that leaf. A little bit more red over here. Now I'm going to just let them blend together. And I'm going to just go in with a damp brush here. Now I just add a little bit more water, which kind of maybe push this. I'm going to get a little bit of blooms over here, which is basically right there. So when you add more water to a paint area that's started to dry just a hair, you could get what's called blooms, which I love. Very organic for this kind of a painting. They work great. It's when you have drying paint and you've introduced more water, you get what's called a bloom. But it's going to be fine for this. So for this leaf, I'm just dropping in some yellow. Now because that's wet, normally I wouldn't do two things next to each other because they would bleed into each other. But this will work, so I'm not worried about it. Normally I would do this leaf, and then I'd come over and do this one, and then maybe that one if I didn't want them to bleed together. So I'm just dropping in some of that yellow ochre, damp brush, just kind of push it around a bit. I'm not making it solid. Not making a solid leaf here. As you can see, I got some lighter areas with some of that yellow. I'm going to go in with a little bit of my green, a little bit of my sap green. I'm going to put some sap green here and there. So just a little bit of sap green here, kind of creamy. You can see it's not very runny on my palette. Oop. Went out there a little bit. Just making a bigger point, that's all. Just dropping in some green. Very random. And now I'll go in, I'm going to add a little bit of my Alizarin Crimson to this leaf here. I kind of tend to go towards the edges. Because I'm not really trying to copy that reference photo. A little bit more of my yellow. A little bit yellow. Creamier paint on my wet paper. Rinse. Grab a little bit more of my Alizarin Crimson. Now, if your paint, when you put it to your paper, I mean, I know that leaf is wet enough, but if your paint is, if you're picking it up and it's not really, if you need to, sometimes I have to add a little bit of water. If it's too thick, you don't want it too thick. You want it just kind of like a little bit of that wet consistency, just enough though. Not too wet, but not too creamy, and that takes time to really get down. You'll start to feel the difference in how your paint is applied to your paper when you use too much water in your paint or too little water in your paint. So I'm just kind of going in, pushing that red around, tell it who's boss. And I'm going to leave that one. All right, I'm going to come down here. I'm going to wet this leaf. Now, if I wanted my veins dark, this is the time to go in and put those veins in, which I'm not going to do. I'm going to make mine a little lighter, so I'll wait for it to dry a bit. Okay, I'm going to wet that one. I'll wet this one. And really, please don't worry if you're not using the exact same colors as me. Really, you could have done this. You could do this painting with just your 3 primary colors, red, blue, yellow. You can make your own greens with blue and yellow. You can make your own browns, red and green. If you want more of a violet-y color, you could use red and blue. Okay, I'm going to drop in. I'm going to get my yellow. Yeah. And I always smear it on. I don't just usually take it right from my well, like normally my palette has these wells, little holders. I don't normally just take it right out of the well and go right to my paper. I like to get it going on my palette a little bit. And same thing, I'm just going to drop in some of that creamy paint. I'm doing both of these leaves at the same time. Just here and there. Clean damp brush. Push that paint around. I just kind of press down on it, move it around, still leave some little light areas in my leaves. I'm not covering the whole leaf. I'm going to add a little bit of green. Here and there. I think what also I'm going to do is to make this one fun. I'm going to add a little bit of my indigo and let it make a green right on my paper because it's going to be mixing with that yellow. So we'll see if that turns a little bit of green. If not, it's okay too. I'm just blending it with a little bit of water. So I'm just taking a little bit of that indigo, put some down here. And let it blend right on the paper. Get some pretty colors. And I might even introduce some of that over here in a bit to harmonize this leaf. I don't want just like blue over here and nowhere else. Okay, let's put in some little bit of red, so a little bit of my alizarin. Let's put some alizarin up here. And a little bit there. Now, I'm not sure what kind of leaves these are. Maybe, I don't know. Maple, I don't know. It's a colorful one. A little bit more green. A little yellow. So you see, I just let those colors just blend together right on the paper. Even though in our reference, it's just pretty much yellow. I didn't want that. So I'm adding a little more green. I want more of an interesting leaf. Okay. Gonna let that one dry. I'm gonna re-wet this one a little bit. And same thing, I'm gonna drop in a little red. You're painting though. You choose your colors where you want to put them. So there's my red. Let's grab a little green. That was a little bit thick paint. See how that's kind of just sitting there. So I'm going to rinse my brush, blot it, and just help move that paint out a little. Damp brush. I know, I've seen some of my students really struggle in my class with the way their paint moves on the paper. And it really is a lot of just muscle memory with me rinsing my brush, blotting it, going in, and knowing the correct amount like of water to have on my brush or on my paper or in my paints. That takes some time to really figure out. So don't get frustrated if yours isn't flowing or blending like mine is. A lot of it determines to the kind of paper you're using and all that. Some paper is, if it's not 100% cotton, you could struggle with it a little bit because it's made from pulp, and it's not as, you can't blend as easily as you can with 100% cotton paper. All right, I am going to move on to this leaf now. So I'm going to just wet this one. While this leaf might bleed out a little bit over to that one, totally fine. And then same, I'm going to be dropping in my yellow, creamy yellow paint. You could also use raw sienna here. You could use lemon yellow, whatever yellow you like to use. Damp brush. I'm going to go with, I'm going to do a little Scarlett Lake here. A little Scarlett Lake red. Put them over here. Rinse, blot, and just kind of move that out. I think I'm going to take a little bit of my brown mixture, actually, that I made earlier with my red and green. Now, see, that's too watery. I don't want to do that. So I need a little bit creamier. So I'm going to blot that excess water off and go in, mix up some more brown. There, nice and creamy. See the difference? It's not moving around like before because my paper's wet. I didn't need very wet paint. I'm going to add a little bit of brown to some of these little edges here. Rinsing and blotting. And just kind of smoothing that out a bit. I'm going to grab my yellow, creamy yellow. And I think what I'm going to do is take some of that yellow and mix it in with this brown. Kind of change that yellow up a bit. And just kind of drop it in. I still don't want to make it, where my leaf is totally solid. One value. I want to have lights and darks in everything. I'm telling you, that's what makes your paintings pop, is the light and dark contrast in your paintings. So this is pretty boring right now, these four. That's got some nice darks to it. But what I'm going to do is go let this dry a bit, and then I'm going to go in and really give some dark little pointy things to my leaves. So let me do the stem here first, and I'll make this one like that. I'm going to add a little bit of more red to this brown. Kind of get like a reddish brown. And that's what I'm going to make my little stems here for my leaves. They kind of all come to a point there, and then I'm going to just use that color. Rinse and just use water. Pull that color out. I'll go back over that, but I'm going to switch brushes now. I'm going to go to a smaller round brush, and I'm going to use my number 4 round. So whatever smaller round brush you have, I would use, because at this point, I'm going to scrape in some veins. Now this one is still kind of wet, but these are drier. So let's see if I can get lighter veins here. I'm not trying to make them perfect either. Now, if you wanted to go in, let's say you didn't like the way this looked, you could go in with your smaller round brush and paint in. You could paint over top of these lines. And this one might get a little bit dark because it's still kind of damp. Okay. So what I could do now, I'm going to let this dry. If I wanted to darken these veins now, I could go in with some darker paint, go right over them if I wanted to. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in on dry paper now. And I'm going to just go over some areas, and I'm going to show you. This is kind of a little bit more advanced technique where it's called negative painting, where if I put a dark on either side of this vein, light vein, it's going to really help that light vein pop out even more. So I'm going to take a little bit of my green here. And because I'm doing this on dry paper, I'm going to, I need a little bit creamier watery paint. But let's add some water to that. It's still not runny on my palette. but it is, you know, it's not too thick and pasty, but it's not crazy runny either. So let me show you a little technique here, because this looks kind of too light for me right now. So I'm going to just in certain little spots, not everywhere, but I'm going to go alongside that little bit of vein. This is just a little advanced technique. I'm just showing you. You don't have to do this. And I put a little bit of green. Now I'm going to rinse really quickly and blot. And I'm going to smooth out those edges because I don't want hard lines. Rinse and blot again and blending out even further the edge of that paint where I put it in, because now you can kind of see that vein a little bit better because I put something dark next to it. So I could go over to this side now. I don't want to do the exact same spot, like, you know, even. So I maybe will bring it over here down a little bit more. And just kind of add a little bit. And see how it just brings that vein right out? And rinse and blot really good, and then just blend out that edge. Basically, that's called negative painting. When you're painting in the negative space for your positive, that the vein is my positive, so I painted in the negative space. And I'm not going to do that through this whole leaf. That would take some time. But what I am going to do is I'm going to darken some of these points. And I think I want a little bit of a purple. I'm feeling it. So I'm going to take a little of my Alizarin Crimson. And I'm going to take a little bit of my Indigo here. Just mix a little bit of that. A nice, pretty, winey color. Very pretty. And I'm just going to do, instead of red, like it's in my reference photo, I'm going to create some pretty wine-colored points on my leaves and really help that leaf to pop. So I'm just picking random little spots here and creating some darker values. And here's the thing, you don't want it to, I don't want it to like leave it and let it sit like that, because it would just dry with that hard edge. So I do a spot or two, and then I rinse and blot, and then I'll go back in just like I did here and blend out the edge. I blend out the edge. And I do rinse again because I'm picking out paint and I don't want to keep carrying that paint around. So I rinse and blot again. And if I need to go back, you know, just to kind of soften that edge. And now what's happening is where I scraped in the vein here, that vein's going to get a little darker because I'm filling it with a little bit of paint. Okay, so I'm going to just leave that there. I'm going to pick up some more of my wine color here. And I'm going to bring it over, well, I'll do the tip here. Maybe along up here a little bit. Rinse, blot. Just the very edge. Blend that line out. Just so I get a nice dark point there. And I'm going to come over here. I think I'm going to do some dark right here. This is where you can really add your finer details and help your paint to really stand out. Remember, we don't want to do details right away. That comes last. You want to build up to those darker values. Light to dark. don't want to go dark right away. So I'm just smoothing out those edges a little bit. Okay, I'm still using that winey color. I'll get some over here. And this gives me a chance as well to kind of clean up my little edges here. A little bit over here. Let me pull it out a bit. This is where your intuitiveness can come into play. I'm just mixing up a little bit more of that wine color. Got really kind of dark. I mix up some more and look how dark that got. So if I wanted that to be a little bit lighter, we just add a little water. Lighten it up. Love the darks. Especially against something very light. So look where I'm holding my brush. I'm very in control here. Just going around with some of these darker edges. Okay, rinse. Blot real good. And just damp brush. Blend out those lines. Because this is on dry paper, those harder edges do dry faster. Just don't let them sit too long. So just blending it out. And you can see every time my hand leaves, I'm going and rinsing my brush and blotting. All right, a little bit more. I'm going to put a little bit dark up here. A little bit over here. See, no rhyme or reason, and I'm not copying my reference photo to the T. Not doing it. If you would like to try and copy those colors, that's totally up to you. Softening those edges. Okay, let's get a little bit more over here. Still using that wine color I made. If you would like to just use darker like greens instead of wine color, whatever. If you want to mix up some darker greens, you can make your own green, make it just darker. So I could take a little bit of my blue. You could even use Paynes Gray and yellow and make a green. Kind of a muted green. You could put that in as well if you wanted. But whatever you do, just be consistent. Don't just use that in one little spot and then nowhere else. So I added it there and there and there. Rinse really good. And just hit those edges. Damp brush. I mean, also, there is no reason why you can't just leave a spot there. You know, a harder edge. That's fine too. I mean, I just kind of am funny. I like to blend out my edges, but really you could. And a little sap green in there. Bring that up. Push down. I'm lifting a little bit of that out. Clean brush. Okay. I think I just need a little bit more dark over here. And this one will be done. Sometimes it helps if you've been sitting at your table for a while and painting, and you're like getting frustrated, or you're not sure if it's done or what. Definitely get up and walk away. Come back later with fresh eyes. I have to do that sometimes because I'm getting frustrated, or I don't think it looks good or whatever. I get up and walk away and come back later. And I see it better. And I see what it needs. And also helps too when you take a picture. That really helps you. When you take a picture of your painting, you'll see the difference in what it needs. Okay. I'm going to leave that one alone. Actually, I'm going to take a little bit of that dark green I mixed up and just kind of hit the tip of this. A little darker. And that's it for that one. Definitely not like, I mean, the same kind of shape, but not colors. All right. Let's move over to this guy. Dry paper. I think I'm going to just take my straight, a little bit of my Alizarin Crimson here. Water that down just a bit. Okay. And I'm going to just, oops, I don't want to leave my hand in that. I'm just going to kind of go in and just strengthen out some of that red. I'm kind of going alongside my little vein here. There, I think I'll go here a little bit. Rinse. And oh, I had a bead of water here. It rolled down. It rolled right into this pile, right into that paint. So I'm going to just press down and remove some of that excess water. And blending out that edge. Pull some over here. So that kind of filled in that vein a little bit. Made it a little bit darker up top there. So let me go with a little bit of my orange. Vermillion. Now remember, you want lighter and darker values in your leaf. Don't make your leaf all one like dark color or no light still in your leaf. It can be multiple colors, but you still want to see some lighter bits in your leaf. You don't want to have it be all one, you know, value color. I waited a little too long on that one. It started to dry. So I'm kind of just trying to blend that out a little bit. Let's go with some more red and go over here. Rinse. And just soften that edge. Sticking with my red. Too watery. Let's get a little bit more paint in that puddle. I'm telling you, I'm just putting paint. I'm just darkening little spots here and there where I feel it needs it. A little bit more of my red. I'll kind of go right up in here. I tend to stay kind of towards the edges here a little bit. And always blend out. I think I'm going to take a little bit of my burnt sienna, that little reddish brown, and I'm going to kind of just go in here and there and just drop in some brown bits. Now I'll show you another way you can add some really cool little spots on your leaves. I'm just softening that out with the damp brush. Blending that, adding a little bit more, kind of darken this spot up, but just a little bit. Okay. Kind of think I need more darker green in there. I'm going to use that dark green mixture that I have already on my palette. And where I have some of my greens, I'm going to go in with just some of that muted green mixture. I'm just putting a little bit in. Not going to fuss over it too much. Maybe a little bit over here. That green. So I used my indigo and my yellow ochre. Made that muted green. Okay. Let me just get some yellow. I'm going to put some yellow in here. Too dry. When you start painting and you start seeing it skipping over the texture of your paper, that's called dry brush, which means everything is too dry. Your paper, your paint, your brush. So just kind of wet it, your brush a little bit. Just kind of pulling some of that color all around here. Okay, gonna leave that one be. This one is dry, and I'm gonna do the same thing. This time I'm just gonna use, some Scarlett Lake red. I'm gonna go in and just kind of darken. Same thing, bits and pieces of some of these leaves. Rinse and blot. And blend out. I'm going to come over here and add a little bit of red as well. Just wherever. And maybe I'll add, at the same time, I'll add a little yellow. Maybe they can mix a little bit on the paper together. Everything's very dry, so it's not moving. Rinse, blot, and kind of just soften. And blend it out. Okay. I'll hop over to this leaf here. I'm going to take the same Scarlett Lake red, and I'm going to kind of just go randomly and put in some reds. Rinse and blot. And pull out. Now this paper that I'm using is very textured, so I'm getting a lot more of that texture look to mine, whereas you might not, and that's just the nature of my paper. So I'm really pulling this out a little bit more. I think I might add a little bit of yellow. And you see, I'm just kind of, there's no rhyme or reason sometimes. I just know I don't want everything too dark, and I don't want everything too light. You want a little bit of both in all your leaves. Picking up a little of my brown. Okay, I'll let that one go. I'll move to this guy. Same, I'm going to use the same colors that I've been using. I don't want to like switch now and use like that wine color or anything. Same colors, a little bit of that Scarlett Lake. Maybe really pull that down here. And maybe I'll put some right here at the base of the stem. Okay. Stop and rinse. and blot and just go in and soften wherever you feel it needs to be. Sorry, my dog. I'm going to add a little yellow. Let that, while that's kind of wet right there, dropping in a little yellow. And I'm going to go with my red over here. Still using that Scarlett Lake, but you can use whatever red you have if you want. If you want these to be green, use your greens. And then soften it this way. A bit of water. And a little more yellow. Okay, let me come over here. And I'm just being very random. And then I go back and just hit it with a damp brush. I mean, they don't all have to be exactly the same. Let me go with a little bit of my green. This little sap green. A little bit more green. Too much on my brush. Get more of my green. As you can see, I have no rhyme or reason where I'm putting that. I'm just doing it. And I just go back. Just hit some of those edges. You just want your leaves to look very organic. You don't want them to look too forced or anything, or too overcomplicated. And now I'll go to this one. A little bit of my red. And sometimes it's hard to know when to stop. And then kind of get paintings that are overworked. I'm the queen of that. I keep getting a bead of water that wants to sit there. So just a damp brush right now. And don't forget, change your water often. And I'm just blending that out. One little tiny red over here. Just kind of balance that. See, I don't want to put my red next to this, like, because then it'll just kind of look like it's all one leaf. So I'm leaving that green, little green space in between. Okay, I'm going to take a little of my burnt sienna here and just kind of darken up that stem. Too much water in here, so I can tell. When I put my paint in, it's like a puddle. And that's how I can tell I have too much water in my paint or on my brush. I just get rid of that excess, and I can go in and use a thirsty brush nail, and it lifts that, it sucks that paint right up. I'm going to add a tiny bit of my indigo right to the end here. Just for the heck of it. Okay. So that's kind of like our leaf tutorial, but what I want to show you is, if you look, you can see some of these leaves have like spots in them. And here's a way you can do that. If you didn't want to get it all over your paper, what you could do is, let's say I want to just kind of focus on this leaf. I'm going to cover these up. And actually, if you didn't want any around, you should probably cover that up as well and just leave your leaf exposed. Well, I'm going to try and just do this. I don't want to splatter all over my paper, but it's just to show you. So you could take some of your brown or whatever color, really, and get a good amount on my brush. Okay, that's burnt sienna. And you could just take it, get a nice amount on your brush, and you could tap your brush onto your leaf if you wanted to do some spots like that. If you don't like how they are, you could just kind of go and like that, and it kind of like lightens them up just a hair. Or you could go in and just hit them with a damp brush like that, and it gives you just some really pretty little spots. Do it again over here if you want. You could use green or red, you know, whatever you like, just to get some random spots here and there. Not going to do it for that one. I did get it on the outside here, but that's fine. I'm going to leave it. So that's pretty much it, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. So I'll let this dry, and I'm going to post it in the group. So you can see my results before you get the video. And again, at any time, if you have questions, please let me know. Hope you enjoy this one. Let me know what you think, and I will talk to you later.